My name is Kacey Gantzer. I'm a planning coordinator for the Department of Agriculture. I cover the northern region of West Virginia, Pleasants County and up. Tonight, we are going to first go over some information about our Ag Business Division here at the Department of Ag, and then we are going to move into our presentations. This tonight is our 20th homesteading webinar, which is really exciting. I can't believe we're 20 in. I'm going to present a little bit on planning for planting, and then I'm going to hand it over to Zach, and he's going to talk with some more details about growing. And I'll do questions in between our presentations and then again at the end. First, a little bit about the Department of Ag. One of our best programs is the West Virginia Grown Program. This is our state premier branding program. And if you are an agricultural producer in the state of West Virginia, we would love to have you join our program. This gives you some really good advertising and marketing tools, and it lets your customers know that their money is being spent in West Virginia on products grown and made here in the state. If you'd like more information, there's the contact. Any of us planning coordinators can help you. We would love to get you signed up for our program. This also gets you in a print catalog each year. You are in our market bulletin, so it's some really good marketing for your business. Another one of our programs is Veterans and Heroes to Agriculture. Dane is joining us tonight. He's our program coordinator, so he could answer any questions. This is a really great program that gives education and mentorship to veterans, heroes, that's first responders, police, EMTs, families of veterans. If you're interested in hearing about some of these opportunities, we'd love to share it with you. They have some really neat scholarship and education programs also. And then finally, we are planning coordinators. Like I said, I cover northern West Virginia. Oh yes, Dane just said to remind, we have a maple syrup class for veterans and heroes coming up soon if you're interested in it. You'll notice there in the middle of our planning coordinator map, there are some counties that don't have a color. Don't worry, if you're in the middle of the state, we can still take care of you. We just kind of hand it off to the person who has the best expertise and kind of the things that you're looking for. So feel free to reach out to your planning coordinator here at the Department of Ag. And if there are no questions about that information, we're going to go ahead and jump right into tonight's program. I'm going to talk about planning to grow from seed to sold. So my background is in farming, mostly in high tunnels and aggregation and distribution. So a few years ago, I had to really step back and look at gardening in a different way when it was a business. And I thought, you know, you have to take every single thing into account from the day you planted that seed, or maybe even before you bought it, till the day you sell it. So when I get new producers or producers who are looking to change their market or scale up, the first thing we want to do is look at these basic questions. Who is your consumer? Are you selling to friends and family? Are you selling at a farmer's market? Are you selling to a school? You really need to understand your consumer. Do they like really exotic kind of niche produce? Or are they looking for a standard slicer tomato? The second question you'll want to ask is, where will they purchase the product? And we know 2020 has brought a lot of changes, so that where should also include how. Is your customer purchasing online? Are they purchasing from a farmer's market? Are they going to pick this product up on farm? Maybe a self-serve booth? You know, all these things need to be taken into consideration when we're planning what we're going to plant. And then when is the ideal or target harvest? I think Zach's going to talk about this some. There are situations in which we can grow things very early or very late, but we need to think about if this syncs up with our market. What advantage would it be to have the first or the last thing in the market? Or if you were able to grow things earlier or later, is that beneficial, and is it worth looking for a market for these products? And then finally, why? Why am I growing? Is it for home consumption and I'm interested in being healthier and maybe it's therapeutic for me? Do I want to grow to share with other people and just have some extras? Am I looking for some small extra income, or maybe just a part-time business? Or is my long-term goal a full-time career in growing? These all make a big difference, and you got to look at the time spent, the money spent, and the return in the end. So the next thing I talk about with new producers is we need to look at a little bit of market research. Who are your primary customers? So if this is the first time you're selling or you're growing for a market garden, maybe it's identifying who that target customer is. Who do you want to be your primary customer? Are you currently selling at a farmer's market, but would also like to maybe tap into the restaurant market or maybe a CSA? You got to think, who are the people that are purchasing from you? Do you live in an area in the state that has some tourism? Or are you selling to the people who live close to you? Are you in an area where people will travel to your farm to pick up these goods? And then if you already have a base primary customer base, is there a group that you would like to capture? So let's say you currently sell on Saturday mornings at your local farmer's market. Is there possibly an option for you to sell online or sell maybe to a food hub? Looking at these options and what else is around you, and market research should also include what everyone else is growing around you, and you might find something that is missing from your market, and that could be a great niche for you to start in. So a lot of our people are looking to scale up, especially in this past year. So you might already be selling at a farmer's market, and you're going to have really great success if you start planning and thinking together as a group. The Department of Ag, I actually will offer, I will come in and help you as a group start doing some planning activities. You might not have taken a survey of what you sold during the season or asked your customers a lot of questions, but I think as a group, you could answer most of these. You as an individual farmer or grower know what your best-selling produce was. If you have that information from everyone, you're going to learn a lot about your market and a lot about your customers. What sold out regularly? What did customers request that you didn't have or was very limited? These simple questions can give you a really good idea to where to start your planning for the following year. Or if you're a new producer, if you talk to other farmers market vendors, you can get a lot of good information out of them. But there's nothing worse than a market where every person has the exact same thing. And it's a really good way to identify some small niches that might work really well for your farm. So before you start growing, what are you going to do? So let's say you're totally new to this whole situation. Number one thing I can tell you is to get a soil test. Please know what you're starting with. This soil test may determine what you grow the first few years. This soil test may determine where you're choosing to grow might not be the best spot. It's very helpful. They're very inexpensive, free in some cases. WVU does soil tests, the Department of Ag, so we can help you with that if you're interested. The next thing to look at is maximizing space. So maybe you've decided you wanted this to be some extra income. Well, I hear a lot of people saying, oh, I don't have enough acreage and I don't have enough space. Especially for small scale produce production, you don't need tons and tons of acres. You probably don't even need a full acre. And it's amazing the way you can grow if you really maximize your space. Looking at companion planting, that means planting things that grow well together or benefit each other. Succession planting, you don't need to plant green beans only one time. Here at my farm, I plant green beans every 2 weeks from early May all the way into September. So that keeps these beds really productive, and I always have green beans to harvest. And looking at season extension, low tunnels, high tunnels, even as far as planting cold weather crops that maybe don't have a high tunnel. And then number three, before you plant, think about protection. You can plant an acre of corn, but can you protect it from deer? Preventative sprays. We don't want to always wait till we see a problem with our plants. So this can be organic. Irrigation. You might have a great year and it rains every day, but the next summer there's absolutely no rain and you need to plan for irrigation. Caging, weed suppression. All of those things it's great to have a plan before you get started. Seed selection. What you find at the dollar store or even some of our big box stores might not really be a plant that is going to work for your goals. A casual gardener, that's fine. But if you're in the mode of wanting to sell, especially if you want to raise plants organically, you need to start with really good seeds and really good transplants. And then finally, harvest and storage plans. It seems so simple, but if you'll notice this picture, I have a whole lot of drywall buckets because that season, I had never imagined the amount of green beans that we would be harvesting on a daily basis. And there really was not a bushel or a peck left to be seen on our farm. So we had to get creative. And if I had really looked at how much I planted, I would have known I would need a lot more harvest containers. And it ended up being kind of a storage nightmare also. So the number 2 question I get at my job is, well, what should I grow? There isn't a simple answer to this question, but with good planning, you can have a much better idea of what to grow. Diversity is the key for small operations. I don't know many small or micro scale farms that can have any level of high value production on a single crop. Most people are selling direct to consumers, and consumers like variety. Even if they don't buy a huge variety, having a diverse looking table at a farmer's market brings in the customers. So you may be amazing at growing lettuce, and tomatoes aren't your thing, but it might be worth growing a few kinds, maybe some unique tomatoes, to bring the customers to your table. And most importantly, we need to understand our cost and the value of our crops. People always say, well, what should I sell this for? And the first thing I usually say back is, how much did it cost you to grow it? If you don't have a good idea of what it cost, setting your price based on everyone else around you isn't going to be particularly profitable. And different parts of West Virginia, different parts of the United States, things sell for different prices. So you really need to know the value where you are selling. And then finally, value-added products. Many of the things we can grow can then turn into value-added products, whether it be a dried herb, a tea, a jam, a salsa, if you want to go all the way with that. And remember that you are the added value. Your lettuce is special because you grew it here in West Virginia. Consider joining our programs like West Virginia Grown, Homegrown by Heroes, Certified Naturally Grown, and other branding programs. When your customer has a better idea of who you are as a farm, as a farmer, as a producer, that adds value to your product. So now you know what it costs you to grow. Now we know that you are adding extra value to that. So a tomato may only be $1 at a grocery store, but we know there is value in what you are growing. And then again, grow what you love and what you're comfortable with. A lot of new and beginning producers want to grow 40, 50 different things and try lots of stuff. Those first few years out, make sure you're focused on things that you really feel like you understand the cycle of the plant, how it grows, and how to market that product. All right, so we've kind of got the idea of what we're going to grow and who we're going to grow it for and where we're going to sell it. Seems so simple, right? Now we just grow it. Well, anyone who's ever had even a tiny garden knows that plants are a lot of work. So we need to look at sourcing, seeding, and transplants. So the last 4 or 5 years, I've run into some issues with high tunnel growers. They want to get those very first tomatoes in, but didn't think about where they will get transplants. So a high tunnel that may have 300 tomato plants, that's probably not something you're starting on your own. So you're going to need to reach out to someone who either does really early transplants, consider starting them yourself, or find someone who will do that for you. I talked to one of my high tunnel growers this morning. She is having her guy start her tomato seedlings in 2 weeks because she goes really early with her tomatoes and it works great for her. But if she hadn't had that person lined up, she would have a very, very hard time finding transplants to put in. Land prep. Hopefully you took your soil test in the fall, and really hopefully you put down a cover crop and your land's getting prepped and your soil is getting better. Another example would be raised beds for sweet potatoes. The great thing and my favorite thing about sweet potatoes is I don't have to plant them till June 1st. I'm here in northern West Virginia. I never plant them before June 1st. This gives me ample time to build a very high, I do about a 16-inch flat-topped raised bed. Knowing that that has to be ready by the end of June, I can schedule myself a little bit later into the spring when the ground is drier. Pest control. Don't wait to make a plan till the pests are already there, especially if you're using maybe beneficial insects, preventative sprays, fertilization. Building that into your plan ahead of time makes it all so much easier. And then harvest. Start thinking about food safety now before it's an issue. How are you going to pack? How are you going to store? How are you going to sanitize your knives and your bins? If all that stuff is planned out, you'll be much better off when the season is starting. And as the season goes, your plans may change. And that's okay. But if you already have one basically written, it's so much easier to go back and change it. And then, you can grow a beautiful strawberry and you can pack it in the perfect clamshell at the perfect temperature. But if you don't have a plan for marketing it, selling it, and then tracking what you sold, might not be worth doing those strawberries. So marketing plan. This can be simple. How do you want to present yourself at the farmer's market? What are the core values of your farm? What do you want your customer to know about the way you grew this plant or this food? Or why it's so important on your farm, or how you're able to have strawberries in April because you use a heated high tunnel. Things like this really engage your customer. Looking at your sales. You may have different price levels at different farmers markets. You may have a wholesale price. You may have a retail price or an you pick price. There can be a combination of the three. And a lot of times in West Virginia, since most people are small scale, that works out better for them. But keeping really good track of your sales, your harvests, your costs, and your losses will let you set those prices and see where to focus your market. So you may have thought, you pick is the way to go. I can get more picked, but I'm only getting, let's say, $4 a quart. And then when you looked at your sales over the year and you were able to get $6 a quart if you pick them, and your labor costs worked out, you pick might not have been the most profitable for you, even though in most cases I think it is. Just knowing those numbers is going to help you a lot as you move on over the years. So how do you do it? Well, you can do something simple. You can write out your plan. I, to this day, still prefer to draw out my garden and draw out my beds. But I also have used apps. This one here is called Grow Veg. Really simple to use, very visual. It allows you to make adjustments. Like you might say, like, I have a lot of shade where I live. An 80-day root crop for me takes 120 days no matter what. So I can go into Grow Veg and adjust that and have my target harvest date. There's a lot of online tools. Some of them get expensive. This Grow Veg is very inexpensive. Or if you really like computer stuff, or you like something maybe a little bit more mathematically visual, a lot of numbers. This is what I use when I work with people with the Department of Ag, people that call me and want basic production planning. This Excel started out with 80 columns, and truly those 80 columns were everything you need to know about planting any individual thing. Well, I've reduced it down to, I think, 28, 29. And it seems like a lot of information, but if you could zoom in and see this better, you would see I have the type of produce I'm growing, Asian greens, what variety. And then all I do is put in the number of days to harvest. And this Excel has been programmed that when you put in your number of days to harvest and the day you're transplanting or seeding, it will give you the date that that target harvest will be. Now, that isn't always the same as back of a seed packet, and you might intuitively know where I live, this takes 80 days. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. And then we have to look at direct seeding and transplanting dates. I originally had the target soil temperature on here, but I was told that was a little too much. But really, for me, that's how I determine when I'm going to plant. Then I have like number of days in the greenhouse before it would be transplanted out. Then as it comes down, we have our projected harvest date and then our planting location. Keeping track right away where things are planted. If you ever moved on to Gap or you wanted to have a larger farm with multiple employees, that could be really helpful. And then my favorite part is succession planting. In this document, you can easily put in your second, third, fourth, fifth round of something as you plant it and see all those projected harvest dates. As it goes on, there's information about when you fertilized, what your harvest was, and this could be in all one single place. So if anyone is interested in learning more about this, I could totally walk you through the process. You could tailor it for yourself and add more columns, take some out. But this has been a really good tool for myself and working with other people, and I would be happy to share with you. And that's it, right on 20 minutes on the nose. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Is there anyone that has any questions before we move on to Zach?
Yeah, Russ had a question there in the chat box. He asked, well, he said he doesn't need a soil test this year, but could he still get one now if he wanted to?
Sure. Where you locate, you could get a soil test through WVU Extension. Zach, what's the NRCS process for getting a soil test?
We just use WVU. The WVU soil testing is you've already paid for it with your tax money, so it's a free service. Go ahead and send them your sample. You can do it any time of the year. Generally, we take it in between the seasons so we can get the beds prepared for next year, but you can really do them anytime. If you're doing really intensive gardening, you can even take them while the crop is in to get an idea of what the nutrition levels are looking for the following crop. But there's not really a limit. I would just say make sure you dry your sample. Don't send wet samples. But other than that, time of year doesn't matter.
All right.
And so I'll be talking about soil testing too, but just while we're here, always make sure to take an aggregate sample. Don't just go out into your field and poke one hole and think that that represents the entirety of that garden or field. You need to take multiple samples, 8, 10, 12, put them into a bucket, mix them up, and then send that off for analysis. That way it's more reflective of the entire body of soil instead of just that one hole that you dug that you sent off. That's just a good practice to have when soil sampling.
I see one more question in the chat box. That production planning spreadsheet was just one that I made for presentations like this. It was not part of Grow Veg. Grow Veg does have some really good stuff in it. It's worth checking out. It will give you like planting dates, target harvest dates. It also gives you like some little tips about each of the crops. But that one you saw on that last slide was just an Excel I made. And
there are additional resources. I know Johnny's Select Seeds has a lot of good growing resources, all sorts of planting things like Kacey had shown there, seed selection, all kinds of things. But there's lots of resources available.
All right, you want to take it away then?
Sure.
All right, this is Zach Perry. He works with WVDA and NRCS.
All right, are we up?
Yep.
Okay, so as Kacey said, my name is Zach Perry, and I'm a joint employee with West Virginia Department of Agriculture and the National Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. So both state and federal Department of Agriculture entities, and my role or title is horticulturist / high tunnel specialist. I mostly deal with high tunnels on day-to-day, but I also do a lot of outdoor crops, traditional gardening. My field office is in Huntington. I serve kind of the southern part, southwest, but I can be anywhere in the state on any given day. But my field office is in Huntington, so I work a lot in the Wayne, Lincoln, Boone, Cabell, Mingo areas. Today I'm going to be talking about garden planning, and I'm going to be focusing on the plants. So we've kind of got a introduction on this from Kacey, and some of our information is going to overlap and coalesce, but that just shows you that it's important. But so the first thing I want to say here is what her first couple slides were about is identifying your market, determining what you're growing for, why are you growing, because that's going to influence your choices down the road and for planning for sure. So is it home use? Is it farmer's market? A CSA? Are you selling it, giving it away? Are you looking to be certified to sell it to a bigger vendor? All of these things are something you need to know before you can make a garden plan for that year. If it's for home use, you can grow whatever you want. If it all dies, it doesn't matter. It's just for you. You know, if you're selling for profit and everything dies, that's no good for you. You know, if you grow a bunch of bitter gourd and you're in Lincoln County and you don't know where to sell those bitter gourd, that might have been a failure in the planning stage. So you need to know where you're going to sell, because it'll influence what you grow. The second biggest determining factor is going to be your frost dates, both spring and fall, and that is what's going to give you your growing season. So I'm in Charleston. We are 6B, and the last frost date is usually around the first week of May. Up in Kacey's area, I would imagine it's, you know, mid-May, closer to June. And so depending on where you are in the state, and given geography too, you can be in the same part in the state, but be in the mountains and be in, you know, almost a 5B or a 6A or something. So figure out what your frost dates are for your exact position, because this will help you to plan pretty much everything. So knowing where you're going to go with the produce that you're growing, why you're growing, and knowing your frost dates are two of the biggest determining factors. So given these considerations, having a reliable knowledge of when to plant these selected crops is critical as well. Knowing when to plant your garden based on what your need is and seasonality of your location can get you the most out of your land. You know, if you're a hobby gardener and you have 4 tomato plants and you got some tomatoes and you're happy, that's fine. But as you get more into it, or depending on what your motivation is, you might want 10 plants or 20 plants or 300 plants or whatever it is. And by planning ahead, you can really get an idea of what, you know, realizing those goals that you have for yield. So here's a picture of West Virginia with the growing zones listed. It looks all green. It's pretty hard to differentiate, but as you can see, you know, in southern part, it's higher, 6B, 7A, northern part of the state, and in the mountains, it's lower, 5A, 5B. This just means that it frosts later in the spring and earlier in the fall. But this can kind of give you an idea of what your zone is if you have no idea. And so due to our latitude and the market demands what people in our area want, there are some plants that are more commonly found and perform better in our state. Most commonly encountered vegetables include beets, beans, brassicas, which are the family that includes broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, and turnips, carrots, corn, Swiss chard, cucumbers, muskmelon, lettuce, onions, eggplants, peppers, potatoes, tomatoes, radishes, spinaches, and small berries like strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, and blueberries. This is kind of the major players. This is our you know, you go to someone's garden, there's a good chance they have 90% of what's listed here. You know, sometimes we have these ideas like, wouldn't it be cool to grow oranges in West Virginia? And while you could maybe do it with a greenhouse and some expensive lighting, would it really be profitable? So that's kind of why there's no crazy things listed on here. Not that you can't grow crazy things, you can pretty much grow what you want if you put your mind to it, and you know, if you have enough money to get it to grow. But these are the West Virginia staples, with the big three being tomatoes, beans, and cucumbers. I work with a lot of high tunnel producers, and so the information, I'm going to give a little bit of high tunnel perspective on some of this for any of those people that might be listening, or for those of you without a high tunnel to see how big of a difference having one can make on when you can plant and the seasonality. So like I said, the planting date is based on the frost, which influences the soil temperature. Kacey stated earlier that it was too much information to put the temperatures on there, but I am a plant nerd, self-confessed. I came from research. I was a commercial grower for 3 years. I'm a plant nerd. I like temperatures. I put them on there. And then in the next couple slides, I'll kind of talk about, how this works as far as months are concerned. But for this slide, I've just kind of grouped everything by temperature. 40 degrees would be very cold crops: lettuce, kale, peas, spinach. 50 degrees, onions, leeks, turnips, Swiss chard. 60 would be your brassicas, beans and beets, and 70s would be the warm weather crops like tomatoes, squash, corn, cucumbers, melons, and peppers. So with the high tunnel, season extension is accomplished by keeping the air and soil temperatures higher than outdoors. That is accomplished through using a polyethylene clear plastic layer over top of a metal skeleton, a frame that keeps all of the heat in and warms up the air and the soil. And you generally get about 2 or 3 weeks in the spring and fall. So we're looking at 4 to 6 weeks extended growing time with the high tunnel. So I have 3 of these made up. This first one is for just traditional crops. Second is for high tunnel crops, and the third is about seed production. There's a lot of information on these, and I can send the slides separate if wanted, but this just kind of gives you an idea of how to go about thinking about this process. So I kind of think of, in the spring, what can go out earliest, what can withstand cold temperatures, and then how long does it take for them to reach maturity. And then from that, and knowing your frost date, you can determine when to plant them outside. Knowing this information can also help you determine when the possible harvest window might be, barring crazy weather events, rains, floods, drought, or crazy wind comes over and knocks all your plants down, or pests or animals, whatever it is. This should be a pretty good way to figure out when to plant to have a known target harvest window. So going down here, I'm going to pick tomatoes because tomatoes are my favorite. Outside, I've listed a generic date here of May 1st. Like I said, depending on where you are in the state, this date may change. If you're where Kacey is and you plant a tomato on May 1st, you're probably going to have a bad time. But here in Charleston, May 1st is a pretty safe week. Last year is a good example. What is it?
I think we have someone that's unmuted. If you could mute yourself. I found it. I got it muted. Just know that someone's got their camera on there. Go ahead.
All right. So let's see, I'm going to use the example of a tomato. Spring planting, you can start May 1st. The harvest would then be not June, that's wrong, should be probably July at the earliest for a 60, 65 day like early grow or some fast fruiting variety. But the harvest window would be, somewhere mid-late June through November, depending on when your killing frost is that year. You're going to want to start your seeds 6 to 8 weeks before transplanting. So if we want to go in on May 1st, you're going to want to start May and March your seeds for the tomatoes to be ready as full-grown, vigorous, healthy, beautiful transplants to put in the garden on May 1st. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides, but this slide just kind of summarizes, when to plant what. And this is, like I said, based on general frost dates. It may differ in your area, so don't hold this as gospel. Kind of know where you are. If you're in a valley or you have some cover in your area, you might want to add some days or maybe a couple weeks. If it's in the middle of a field and there's nothing around it and you're in very southern West Virginia, you might even get a week earlier. These are just kind of guidelines, and that's why I like to use the soil temperature and a soil probe, but not everyone has access to that or time to go out there and put the soil probe in, let it acclimate, take a reading, take a few of them, average them, make sure it's right. You know, this is a pretty good guide though. So if you can see, we'll stick with tomato as May 1st to July 15th. We'll go over to the high tunnel, and the same tomatoes would be going on March 30th. So exactly a month earlier. And those would be ready in June. Still weeks from starting the seeds to transplant. It doesn't change. You're not going to make a seedling grow any faster. Days to maturity ranges depending on the variety. That's something to keep in mind. You know, I put 70 to 90 here. There's some that are 65. They all vary. And whenever I look at the days to maturity on a transplant from a seed catalog, some of them are different, but a majority of them go with the same rule of, so if it's direct sown, if it is a pea or something, and it says, you know, 65 days, it's probably around the time that you plant the seed. So if it's something direct sown, if it says 65 days, it's 65 days from sowing or germination. Now, if it's a transplant, it's going to be from the time that you plant the transplant. So a 65-day tomato will not be ready 65 days after you plant the seed. It'll be ready 65 days after you transplant into the garden with a transplant. This is a plant with 4 or 5 sets of leaves. It'll be about 65 days for that. So those can get kind of confusing. Trying to think of what other items are on these before I go to just seeds. Anyway, I can send these out individually if you all like, for either high tunnel or just the traditional garden. So this one is very similar. It's just a seeding guide. So it's going to tell you the crop. You all can see my cursor, the crop here, number of weeks before setting out date, when you want to start them inside, kind of the timeline there, and safe to set plants out relative to the frost-free date, which will give you when you're going to set them out. So we'll go back to tomatoes. We know there's 6 to 8 weeks from planting the seed to when you set them out as transplants. I would start them inside between mid-March and early April, and they're safe to set outside 1 to 2 weeks after the last frost, which gives you a plant ready to go in the ground May 6th through 13th, so the first or second week of May. But in order to get there, you have to have planted that seed the second week of March. So knowing all these things and how they work together is really critical on getting the most out of your gardening experience. Succession planting. So there are 2 kind of major ways to accomplish this. The first way are by using different varieties. So let's say you have 5 different types of, we'll go with cucumbers here, each with a different maturity date. There's a 65-day, there's a 78-day, there's an 85-day, and a 90-day. So even within that, if they're all planted at the same time, they're going to start setting fruit at different points and finish up at different times. Same can be done with tomatoes, any plant really. You just choose a couple varieties that mature at different rates, a fast, maybe a normal, and then a slow maturing one, and you can plant those all at the same time, and that'll give you an extended harvest. The second way to do it is by staggering the planting, and this can be even done in combination of using different varieties. It might be each week you plant a row of Amadeus and a row of Crispal lettuce every 2 weeks, or you could just be planting 2 rows of Amadeus lettuce every 2 weeks. So you can combine them or separate them, but the staggered planting, you would just make a successive plantings on a regular iteration. So be that 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, and that just depends on the crops. So the quicker growing plants like lettuce, spinach, beets, turnips, and peas, that would be on a 2-week rotation. Carrots, cucumbers, kale, collards, and melons would be on a 3-week rotation. Corn would be 2 to 3 weeks. And summer squash, Swiss chard are every 4 weeks. With that said, when you're planning your garden, you want to plan for the entire year and not just the spring. If you're happy with growing in just the spring, that's fine. But if you want to maximize and have the most economical garden that you can and really just get as much as you can out of each square foot of that garden, whether it's a restriction of you have a small backyard garden or you have a certain amount of square footage in a high tunnel or only a certain part of a field that you can put in row crops, you're always going to want to try to be as economical as possible. Plan ahead, think of, we have this example listed here of in the spring, you're starting with cabbage plants. They're going to come out in, June. After they're harvested and cleaned up, you can go back and plant peppers in that same spot. Once those peppers are done, you can clean them up and go in with a cover crop and have something growing over the winter. Cover crops are a great item to work into your rotations. You can get cover crops that grow in the fall or winter. You can get cover crops that grow in the spring or summer. You would just choose a different cover crop depending on the time of year and what you're trying to accomplish. So just knowing, looking at the entire year, knowing your growing season, when you can start, when you can finish, if you want to grow a cover crop, when you would need to get it in the ground by, laying all these things out using either an application or an Excel file or whatever form it is, pencil and paper, writing everything down and taking all these things into consideration can really help. 12,000 years ago, our hunter-gatherer ancestors figured out that if you plant seeds and do certain things to them each year, they'll come back. And in those 12,000 years, I'd like to think we've improved quite a bit from that. There's an immense amount of knowledge out there. If you have any specific questions that we haven't covered, feel free to reach out to us and we can try to get you directed in the right way. But there's an immense amount of information out there, and this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I just wanted to touch also on fertility and soil testing. I already said a little spiel on it, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit more because you can plan all you want, but if the ground itself and the husbandry is not kept correct, the plants will not grow as great as they could. So plants assimilate nutrients from the soil to grow. This means they're taking the chemical elements found in the soil and using those to grow themselves, to make new tissue. Okay, so as they do this, they're removing it from the soil, leaving the soil depleted of certain nutrients. If you remove those plants, the plant debris after the growing season, and it's not returned to the soil, any nutrition extracted from the soil is physically removed from the garden. So at the end of the year, you chop everything down, take it out in a big pile and burn it. It's probably not the best thing to do, but what you do is up to you. But what I'm getting at here is soil testing should be done at least once per year before the growing season, generally after the previous season one's over. Now is a great time, fall is a great time. So this allows you the time to get the results back as well as work on any amendment issues, especially pH takes quite a while to work. It takes several months, 6, 8, 10 months for ag lime to really work completely to balance and buffer that pH. The other amendments, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium. Calcium's going to go with your lime, but the other ones, NPK, you can apply them right before planting. They're pretty easily put back into the soil with the exception of nitrogen. Nitrogen leaches really easily. As soon as you turn over a shovelful of soil, the nitrogen cycle occurs and it's constantly in flux. So when you get a soil test result back, it will never indicate an exact number of nitrogen. It'll just give you a ballpark depending on the plant that you're planning on growing. And that's just because it's so hard to assay the actual content. It's so hard to say there's X amount of nitrogen at this time, because by the time you take the sample, send the sample, they analyze it, the nitrogen cycle's already been going on and it'll give you false results. So do soil tests. Many of our commonly grown crops, tomatoes, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, cucumbers, are very heavy feeders, and they also benefit from fertilizer application during the growing season. In high tunnels, as no outside rain can get into the tunnel, it's very common to encounter fertigation units in the micro-irrigation systems. The micro-irrigation systems are just small tubes that run the length of the rows inside of a high tunnel to supply the plants inside with water. High tunnels are essentially closed. While the sides do roll up and down for heat mitigation, no rain can penetrate that plastic layer. And because of that, they have irrigation systems. Usually in conjunction with this is a fertigation unit, which is just a way of getting fertilizer into the irrigation water. You can do this outside with row crops too, certainly, depending on your scale and what you're trying to accomplish. In combination with black plastic mulch, it's, that's commercially how most of our crops are raised. If you don't have access to this, you can certainly side dress with fertilizer to help boost production. Side dressing is just adding some fertilizer near the plant, not on top. You don't want to, dig a hole right by your tomato plant stem and put a little bit of pure fertilizer. It's going to burn the roots and your plant's not going to have a great day. You can go 6-8 inches to the side of the row, make a line, put the designated amount in it, cover it up, let it water in, and the roots will slowly leach it in and not burn them. I did want to talk about this fertility and soil testing while I'm on here. I don't know. Yep, that was it. So if there's any specifics about any specific crop or any questions about what I've said, just let me know. This is my contact information. And I'm probably going to stop this here.
If anyone on the phone would like to ask a question and you can't use the chat box, feel free to do that now. And then we'll still also be on our YouTube channel, and I got some emails. We can send you the information. Does anybody have any questions? Quiet group. Well, hopefully we didn't give you too much information. I know there's a lot there to think about. We really appreciate everyone coming on and joining us this evening for our 20th webinar. Feel free to follow up with us. We can share some of these documents, especially the planting calendar. And one last call for any questions.
Hi, this is Nancy Ray. Really appreciate this presentation. It's very good information. So who do I send the email to get the information, documents, the presentation?
Are you on the phone, not on the chat?
Actually, I'm on the chat. But
okay, if you put your email in there, we can send you the information. We can send you the PowerPoints or whatever you need.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Just drop anyone who wants this information. You can drop your email in the chat box. I see Russ said he's waiting on his planting calendar. I've seen most of the extension office posts that they have them in now. All right, I got your emails. That's great. Thank you. And feel free to contact us if you just want to talk more about planting or want any more information also. Good, we're getting lots of emails. Thank you. And again, this was recorded and it should be up on our YouTube channel in just a few days. And if you missed any of our other webinars, we have 19 we did before this, and they are all available on the West Virginia Department of Agriculture's YouTube channel. And thank you, everyone, and have a really good evening.